Okay, we're going to do 4.1 review. First problem, find the inverse of f of x equal 3x cubed minus 2. Our first step is write this as y equals 3x cubed minus 2. Switch x with y. X equals 3y cubed minus 2. And then solve for x. And to solve for x, or I mean solve for y rather, to solve for y, we'd add 2 to both sides. So we get x plus 2 equal 3y cubed. Divide both sides by 3. So x plus 2 over 3 equals y cubed. And then last, cube root both sides. So we get cube root x plus 2 over 3 equals y, which we would label this as f minus 1 of x, standing for the inverse of x. And the reason this procedure works is because to solve that equation for y, we have to reverse all the operations of the function, and we have to do it in reverse order. So that just naturally gives us the steps of the needed in the inverse function. And if you notice, all we've really done is switched x with y and rearranged the equation. So the inverse is the same equation with x and y switched with each other. Okay, our next problem, we're going to find the inverse of f of x equal 2x squared minus 1, which has a restricted domain of x greater than or equal to 0. And also, we're going to state the domain. First of all, it's important to state why we have to restrict the domain. F of x is 2x squared minus 1. Now, f of x is this parabola, and it actually has the point 1, 1. But we're only using the right side of this parabola because if we use both sides, it doesn't have an inverse. If we have both sides of this f of x function, there could be 2 different x values that would give me a specified y value. So we cut off half of that parabola. We're only using the right side of it. So that's important to note why we restrict the domain. So now let's find the inverse using the procedure y equals 2x squared minus 1. Switch x with y. X equals 2y squared minus 1. Then solve for y. X plus 1 equals 2y squared. Divide by 2. X plus 1 over 2 equals y squared. And now we extract square roots. Now normally you get a plus or minus, but in this case, only the plus. So our inverse function is f minus 1 of x equals the square root x plus 1 over 2. Now, the domain. Here's our f of x. Now, if you read through the notes and looked at the examples, one of the things pointed out was the inverse function is going to be a mirror image across this line y equals x. Well, if that's the case, it's going to look like that. So that's what the graph is going to be. It's going to be a sideways parabola, and look where it starts. It starts at -1 and goes off to infinity, and that's what our domain ends up being. Domain is x greater than or equal to -1. The domain of the inverse is equal to the range, or the y values of f of x. F of x starts at -1 and goes up to infinity. So the domain of the inverse starts at -1 and goes out to infinity. So that's our domain, x greater than or equal to -1. Okay, now I'm going to do a few review problems that are similar to the 4.1 homework. Solve d equals a over bx plus cx for the variable x. Now here we have two terms with x, and they're in the denominator. Whenever you're trying to solve for a variable and it's in the denominator, you want to move it in out of the denominator. And the easiest way to do that here is to multiply both sides by bx plus cx. And when we do that, we get d times bx plus cx equals a over bx plus cx times bx plus cx, and they cancel. And now what I would do next is just divide both sides by d, giving you bx plus cx equals a over d. So now we have two terms with x in it. And whenever that's the case, we have to combine those terms with factoring. We factor out the x. So x times b plus c equals a over d. And then finally, divide both sides by b plus c. So x equals a over d divided by b plus c. You can leave it that way. You can rewrite it. Another way this could be written is a over d times b plus c. But either way, you've solved for x in terms of the other variables. So either answer is acceptable. Okay, we're going to do a problem like number 9 of the homework. We're going to graph y equal negative 0.04x squared plus 0.4x plus 1, which is a quadratic function, so it's going to be a parabola. The coefficient in front of x squared is negative, so it's going to be an upside down parabola. And it's got this 0.04 coefficient, which means it's flattened out quite a bit. So the homework says use the vertex formula, and that is the best way of identifying the vertex. The vertex is at x equal negative b over 2a, which in this case is negative 0.4 over 2 times negative 0.04. And when we plug that in, put it in our calculator, we end up getting 5 for x. So then we have to calculate the y value. And when we plug in x back in our function, negative 0.04 times 5 squared plus 0.04 times 5 plus 1, and calculate that out, we get y equals 2. So the vertex is at 5, 2. So now we're going to plot that graph. And a couple real easy points here are when x equals 0, y equals 0 plus 0 plus 1. So we get the point 0, 1. And then if we let x equal 10, we also get y equal 1. So that gives us our parabola. And now the intercepts, to find the intercepts, we let our function equal 0. 0 equals our function, and that's just a quadratic formula problem. Plug all the coefficients, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And we get two answers for the intercepts. 12.07 for x when y is 0, and negative 2.07 for x when y is 0. So those are the points just to the right of 12 and just to the left of negative 2. So that's how we find the intercepts, just letting the function equal 0, because that's when the y value is 0 at the x-intercept. Okay, that's it for this review. If you have any questions, post them in discussions.